Welcome to Say Hi to the Future, Episode 1, Resilience During a Time of Uncertainty, with guests Bailey Parnell, CEO and founder of Skills Camp and Safe Social, Eve Staszczyszyn, co-founder of Wellness World, and your host, Ken Tenser.
Thank you both for joining us today to discuss such an important topic, resilience during a time of uncertainty. Let's start by talking about mental well-being and its importance while going through trying times. So Bailey, how's resilience impacted your career with Skills Camp and Safe Social?
You know, it's kind of funny, Ken, in my many different roles, because I own Skills Camp, which is a soft skills training company, and then Safe Social, which is about social media and mental health. And if we had to put a through line between all of them, it's very possible that resilience would be that through line, because at Skills Camp, it's literally one of the workshops that we teach, resilience and stress management, and it's been definitely the most popular over the last year. So in a way, it's kind of like the skill that made the business resilient as the economy changed. And then at Safe Social, step 3 is building the offline soft skills in order to have a better relationship with social media. And one of those key skills right there on the website is resilience. And it's because you start to change your reaction to anything that might happen to you on social media. And then sort of, I suppose, in the trifecta, there's me as the third part of the triangle. And I think that resilience is one of the most important skills for an entrepreneur, if not completely highlighted by the last year, the ability to be able to not only bounce back and withstand stress, but to thrive in the face of that. So I think resilience for me has been a natural through line between Skills Camp, Safe Social, and just my personal life as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, and I think that one point that you hit on, the importance of it for entrepreneurs in the last year. I mean, we've all had to go online in different ways. Must have been something that you really, had some success with, or hopefully got some traction with, because there's a lot of us who might need that help on portraying ourselves online.
Yeah, we're very fortunate in that my background, though I didn't necessarily expect that this would come up so usefully this year, is actually in broadcast presentation and media production. That was my undergrad. So kind of funny, full circle, how this year hits. And while we were set up for online programming, it was definitely not the most of our business. It was probably 5% of our business before the pandemic. And then this hit and it was like, okay, now it's 100%. Actually, I'm lying. There was 4 months of zero business while everybody was still afraid. And that's where the resilience, I suppose, really had to kick in. And then it went 100% online. And then I've just kind of been building on that over and over again to make the online experience feel as close to the in-person as possible while still designing for online.
And as a father of 3 20-year-olds, I'll pick out something you said there. Stay in school. It actually teaches you something.
Or make meaning of the skills that you learn, because you never know when they're going to be useful again.
Eve, so how did the need for resilience play a role in the launch of your company, Wellness World, and your awareness campaigns?
So really, when I think about resilience, I think about imagining the best case scenario, and then already assuming challenge. And so this was really key. And when my co-founder, Liv Han, and I launched Wellness World, it was really, this constant this constant change that was happening. But what we kept at the forefront was knowing that there's going to be a lot of fires to put out. I hear Bailey talking about this too, like already knowing that you're going to have moments where you feel defeated, and having that mindset of knowing and already assuming that challenge, but at the same time, keeping at the forefront the vision that we're pursuing. And so Liv and myself launching Wellness World, really what we're doing is we're building more resilient, self-aware, and connected campuses. And so supporting students as they assume the challenges through the university experience and giving them the tools, the content, the workshops that they need to live a better student life experience.
Well, so tell us a little bit more about the programs, Eve, and how you're helping students, especially this year when, campus life really hasn't existed.
Yeah, it has changed radically since last March. So under Wellness World, it's a software as a service venture where we have a holistic student life platform, and we focus on community, physical health, and mental health. So already multidisciplinary there. Really, the content and the workshops that I'm talking about are ones that pertain to time and versus energy management, as well as employing mindfulness in your day-to-day practice in between classes, for example. And so really what we're trying to do is have that holistic student life platform where we don't really have student life, unfortunately. We don't have it in person. So how can we translate that digitally and create those communities digitally as well?
Great. And so, Bailey, I know you've gone through some trying times recently. What does resilience mean to you personally?
Well, first off, Eve, I have to say I love what you're doing, and I'm so glad to hear that someone's trying to create the student life experience online for students who really, really need it right now. It's so difficult to be a student right now. I feel so bad for them. But yes, Ken, definitely in the last 2021 has not been kind, unfortunately. We lost my mom a couple of weeks, I think a month ago now, but it feels like yesterday. And so I've been thinking a lot about one of her main teachings, which was resilience. And I'm not even making that up, though. In her day, she literally sometimes called it, she used to say, suck it up, buttercup. We've discussed that later in life, but I've actually been thinking a lot about her teachings. And I think one of her main things was the strategies kind of that she used to pull herself up by the bootstraps that I would now call sort of thriving or coping strategies. She just came by that very naturally. And so right now, resilience to me is kind of relying on those skills that I know that I have. And even when parts of my brain are going offline in whether it's grief or just kind of catching up with everything or stress or whatever it might be in the moment, it's going back to what I know is there locked in. And I think Eve kind of mentioned it in a way, that vision, that thing that was locked in before any of this happened, that is kind of one of those constants that keeps me grounded.
I think that's actually a great saying, the suck it up saying. It's unfortunately, fortunately we make life what we want it to be, but it is going to throw those trying times at us. And I think those are sage words to hold on to. And so, Eve, how have you found 2021? Because I know it's taken your business and you kind of on the road in its development.
There's definitely been a lot of sucking it up, for sure. That's how we've gotten through. But in all seriousness, I think, even on a personal note, wrapping up undergrad and launching Wellness World, the whole virtual setting of online learning, I think that's definitely we see that across the board as a challenge for students. But in terms of how the business has formed, it's definitely been embracing also opportunity in the time of a crisis and recognizing that there is a new set of challenges to solve. And so also the same way that, I'm learning just as we build Wellness World, it's also identifying new sets of challenges, which I think we'll talk about later today as well.
So what is it, talk to me a little bit more about wellness and what it actually means to you and how it impacts you daily.
Wellness, such a buzzword, but also such an important one, such an important concept always, but especially at this time. So wellness is super multifaceted. There's a bunch of different models that we'll talk about, the 5 pillars of wellness, 7 pillars, 8 pillars, 12 pillars. Really the one that I stick to usually is the 8 pillars of wellness, being physical, nutritional, emotional, social, spiritual, intellectual, financial, and environmental. And when we think about wellness in general, it's multifaceted and it's also unique to every person. It's based on our lived experiences, our unique needs and wants, our identities, ultimately. But just drawing on these pillars, it's really wellness. I see it as fulfilling these 8 pillars, not 100% necessarily, and not all the time, but fulfilling it to the extent that feels right for us. And again, going back to the unique aspect of this, someone may value financial wellness more than they do spiritual wellness. And that's okay. That's based on our, unique preferences. And then within those pillars, there's also different thresholds. So someone may feel that in, spiritual wellness, they want to be able to connect with community based on faith, or it may mean a connection to a higher power and feeling that. So, we have different sort of thresholds within that. And ultimately, when we feel fulfillment in these different pillars of wellness, I think that it allows us to live a more dignified and meaningful life. So really drilling down, it's how can we on a day-to-day basis, maybe not achieve that 100% in all those 8 pillars, but knowing that, life also comes in ebbs and flows, but how can we, for more time than not, fulfill those pillars?
And Bailey, when I listen to Eve, I got to think that through Skills Camp, there's just a lot of things that you would pick up on in helping us be resilient.
Yeah, for sure. I'm definitely out there promoting Eve's message. So I'm so glad to hear that you're considering wellness more holistically than I've seen many peers of ours. So I think that's really the way to go, and to know that that different pillars are important to people in different parts of their lives. And I like that. I wonder, I'd be so interested to find out in a year if you found that with your market of students, if they've kind of hit on a top 3 pillars that they're most focused on or something like that. But yes, at Skills Camp, when we first started, we were mostly in higher ed. So I started to see the soft skills of the ones that we teach, ones that were related to sort of the finding and maintaining meaningful work were the most important ones, whether it was personal branding or figuring out, how to talk about yourself and your strengths and things like that. But now I work mostly with adult learners, and mostly with people who are already sort of well into their careers through corporate or government or nonprofit. And I love to hear that the wellness piece of it, we always include it in our soft skills training, even if we're working with an organization on sort of productivity and time management, which this past year has more so been working from home, trying to be productive at home while not burning out yourself. Like there's always that second part too, or the fact we'll go and we'll teach you some productivity tips to better manage your time, energy, and attention at home. But you have to also understand that in our model, and I'm glad, I guess I'm repeating Eve here, but in our productivity model that we use, it does start with time, but then it goes into energy and attention, because really you could set the time, but if you have no energy to pay attention or focus, it's just going to be kind of unused time. Yeah. So I suppose that's a roundabout way of saying that in one way or another, wellness should probably be included in all the soft skills training, and the other way around as well.
Well, no, thanks for that, Bailey. And Eve, I've listened and watched, sort of the evolution of what you do or what you're doing since the beginning. And it just seems that there's a lot of things that you thought about at the beginning, the pop-up wellness on campus that, to Bailey's point, really, it's not limited to student life, that especially in the last year, when we're all locked at home, we could all use a little bit of a wellness break, a meditation break or whatnot.
For sure. I think it's something that is universal. And I think to Bailey's point on energy, I think wellness and energy are so interconnected, where when we find that we're fulfilling the aspects of, our wellness pillars, we do find we have the energy to be extroverted or introverted, right? And to be able to take up space with energy, because that's something that we're finding across the board, specifically with schools, is just this, students, is just this complete drain of energy. And I'll just, make a point right now to say, I think something that we've noticed, something that's changed for students since the beginning of the pandemic, is we see a lot of disengagement, and it's quite concerning because it's that social wellness point. And Bailey, earlier you asked about, what would be the top 3 wellness pillars that we see are important. I think really we're seeing social wellness emerge, and seeing that people want to feel socially connected, but it's tough through this virtual setting. And so they're really preserving their energy. We see that a lot because of disengagement or, low attendance, low participation. And so it's a matter of how can we fulfill the other parts of our life so then we can get that energy to also be social. I'm curious to know what you have to say about that as well, Bailey.
Gosh, that's exactly right. And I think you're hitting on the fact, with students, more than anyone I can think of in my life right now, or at least the ones we're working with, because my fiance is also a professor at Ryerson, but they have all the time in the world, theoretically. Right now, we've all had all the time in the world. Again, theoretically, because in practice, no, we have not. But in that time, so many people are burning out higher than ever, feeling lonely, which drains all those other kinds of energies. And then you feel like, I was going to go build that deck, and then I don't. And now I'm shaming myself for that. And it just becomes this spiral of sort of unhelpfulness to yourself. When really, if you could work on probably that energy piece or fulfilling the different buckets in a different way, which would be a coping strategy. If we're bringing this back to sort of resilience and change, it would be what I'm working with a lot of people on right now is, have you adapted your strategies for the current reality? Because the ones that you have maybe used your entire life, whether you did it consciously or not, or maybe as intentionally as Eve and I or not, you may have gone out for lunch with your friends, and that's how you kind of got everything off your chest that you were doing at work the day before. Or you had your kind of girls' night out with your friends on Thursday evenings, and maybe that's how this mom is, just like letting it all go. And those circumstances have changed, especially for my extroverts out there. So have they thought intentionally about the coping strategies that they can use today, or the strategies that they will use to withstand stress? And I find that a lot of the adults that we work with really don't get a lot of time period to think about themselves unjudged without paying for it. So if we can facilitate that for them, or if Eve can, or if this just kind of watching this or hearing this can do that for them, make them think about their own coping strategies, then we're getting somewhere.
And Bailey, how do you think empathy plays a role in what we've learned? I mean, it just seems that for me, watching through the pandemic, we've become even more me-centric. And that says a lot for society today, if you can actually become more me-centric. So where does that play in Skills Camp and what you're seeing? And how do you help people overcome that and really understand that, what others are going through?
Yeah, so completely unplanted for anybody listening, but this is the God's honest truth. Our second most popular program this year is Empathy in Practice. Okay. So, and I think that it's funny that you're saying the me generation, because I've seen really both sides of that. Actually, I've seen, yes, people maybe out of need have had to focus on themselves, and in times of crisis and change, you kind of go down Maslow's hierarchy to your basic needs. And when your basic needs of food and shelter and a job and security are threatened, then you're not so worried about self-actualization or the actualization of others. However, I've also seen the complete debilitation of people because they have maybe too much empathy right now. And all you were seeing on the news this whole year is things that they had no control over changing. The global pandemic, people dying, like racial unrest. Unrest is like injustice that's finally getting more airtime. And then you're seeing this all, but people feel like they can't do anything about it, and they couldn't congregate and they couldn't come together. And then that's causing a sense of unease. And so really both sides I've seen kind of empathy as a debilitating piece of yourself, and then empathy not there. And I'd say that the thing we teach most about empathy in practice right now, or the thing maybe forgotten, is that when we colloquially define empathy, we think putting yourself in someone else's shoes, and we will open every workshop by saying, it's not really about you, actually. It's really not about putting yourself in someone's shoes, because you might react completely differently to that stressor, to that change. And then you might have the exact same stressor, and or different things will affect you differently. Or you might want to say, like, why are you freaking out over that? Or, I wouldn't be angry. And so you want to prescribe something that you would need in that situation. And that's very, I think, normal, though not necessarily empathy in practice. And particularly this year, I think it's required even more radical empathy with people that sort of disagree with you or behave differently than you. So we remind them of that, and then we get into the differences between what does empathy actually sound like versus sympathy versus one-upping responses to people in distress, that sort of stuff. So I think it's an absolute key ingredient to just better relationships, period. And then empathy for yourself if you want to start building resilience and actually kind of getting through to the wellness the sort of holistic wellness Eve was talking about.
Well, and Eve, you do talk a lot about that and the connection between mindfulness and building resilience. So where does empathy fit in? Where does that become part of your model? And how have you seen that, take on a different light, if you will, in the last year?
It's a loaded question. It's a really good question. And firstly, I'll just say, Bailey, I definitely want to take that empathy course of yours. I'll have to connect with you afterwards about it, because you're, spitting so many facts. But to answer your question, Ken, I think when I think about empathy, I think about actually the me. the me-centric empathy for a moment, because I think right now in the time of the pandemic, I think we, are extending empathy to the family members that we have to live with, for example, or, right now with the great movements and the racial injustice, there's and through social media, we're able to have closer to connection to others than we ever had before. And there's such a saturation also of social interaction through the internet. That being said, though, I do think part of empathy is also being able to empathize with yourself, in the sense that you're being honest with yourself about what's coming up, being vulnerable with yourself, acknowledging what is surfacing for you. And I think this plays into mindfulness for sure, where I think we can really meet others to the extent that we can also acknowledge our own thought patterns, our own insecurities, and so forth. So I think that's making it very me-centric, but I do think empathy comes from within. And I think if we can have more forgiveness, hold more space for ourselves, we can also do that for others. And I think that's also why it's important to hone in on, preserving our energy and also prioritizing our own needs at times, like our basic needs, in order to be able to come from a place of giving, from a place of having and being able to give outwards.
Now, how do we actually separate ourselves or know who we are? I mean, in the last year, our relationship has been through screens. So the whole notion of empathy and being empathetic to oneself, and just an open question. So how do we know where we end and the rest of the world actually begins anymore?
Getting pretty philosophical there, Ken. You want to go into existential debate? Where do we end? I think that when we do empathy in practice, and particularly as it relates to resilience and emotional intelligence, we include social awareness and sort of nonverbals as sort of the 9 types of nonverbal communication. And we go even deeper into the ones that are still very much available to you on video chat, which are 7 of the 9. So that's actually quite a bit of ways that you can still really communicate with someone. And really that's how we build empathy, I think, through stories and through relationships, which are not, they're certainly not tied to a screen. And maybe you could see it as the screens as a way to oversaturate yourself with stories, which is kind of what I've felt that I've definitely needed to manage my media intake during this last year, because I feel things like I had already said, actually, I feel things for people that I can't really do anything about, except it's all day, every day. So you have to kind of open that and I guess manage it.
Okay.
On that note, yeah, I think I was just I don't have anything too profound to add. I think Bailey is the expert here on empathy, but I will say in relation to connecting digitally, I think even myself, I took 2 months away from Instagram just because I felt like there was such an overload of information, and it's especially empathy being a spectrum, exactly what Bailey's saying. I very much agree. Like, it can be to a point where it's debilitating. It's actually dangerous for oneself. It's a very powerful thing, but I think it's also needs to be regulated as well. And so that being said, it's also like, how can we also be more selective about some of the information that we're taking in, so that we can be more intentional, even in terms of, where we let our energy go and all that.
Mm. And it's so important to know, like, I think we've seen over this last year in particular, like, just because you feel sad about it is not an excuse to not learn about something, but the way you learn about it and to what degree, and how much you saturate yourself with or without balance is kind of getting into the gray territory that is life. Mm-hmm. So I would say to people, maybe you don't want your social media that you spend 6 hours a day on to be flooded with news, but that doesn't mean it can't still get the news. I use an email digest at the beginning of every day, and that's how I get it every day. And guess what? There's still these other things like a TV or a radio or the news website itself. So it's like, you don't have to fill your news or your media diet in one way if it's getting to you, but that's still not an excuse to not to know what's going on.
Absolutely. And Eve, any advice that you'd like to offer to people who are working through uncertainty and the being bombasted, is that the right word? Being being overrun by social media and messaging?
I think I kind of have a maybe piece of advice that I'm sharing with myself and with my friends these days. In the time of the pandemic, I think, and always, we're living in a society that is, I think, super harsh. We're very obsessed with productivity, about our outputs. And I think it's really important sometimes when we don't get through our to-do lists, or we're having a tough day because we feel the Zoom fatigue catching up to us, is to introduce more forgiveness in our life. And I think this also plays into empathy when it comes with others. It's like, how can we have a bit more forgiveness? Because I think it's important to introduce forgiveness when we want to move on from anything, or we want to achieve. I think so much we get wrapped up in this shame and guilt of not being able to, accomplish a task, or, maybe we weren't there for someone when we want to be, but we get wrapped up in the shame and guilt. And the only thing really to let us move on from it is forgiveness. So how can we first introduce forgiveness, and then we're able to move forward? And then, I agree with Bailey, even like we, needing to be informed, empathy, it needs to be in practice with others, of course. And hope I didn't come off too me-centric before, but it truly, I think, I think we need to have this forgiveness for ourselves and for others in order to be able to empathize in the best way that we can.
Eve, I think you're getting at a concept that we call radical empathy, which is fundamentally it's what I try to practice, but it is a practice. It's hard, particularly when someone requires that forgiveness first. And the thing that makes it radical, or getting to the radical root cause, is actually changing the fundamental way that you go into interactions with people. Instead of having them react in some way or present an emotion and then try to apply empathy in retrospect, it's actually kind of going into your conversations and your life with them, understanding that there's things that you don't see, and understanding that they might have completely different conditioning than you, and understanding that their freaking prefrontal cortex might be offline because they're in times of intense stress. So they might not be their most productive and smartest. You actually, physically, literally cannot be your most productive and critical thought self when you're in times of intense stress, because you flood your prefrontal cortex and give yourself a lot of cortisol. So you actually can't be. If we just had maybe more empathy for what everyone else is going through as well, it's also possible that they might be behaving in ways that they either learned earlier in life, or that they honestly wouldn't do if they weren't in times of intense stress.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Bailey. Thank you, Eve. It's been a great half hour. Really appreciate it. And I think the message has come out very loud and clear, is how important we are in understanding ourselves. And while we've come out of an extreme time of uncertainty, even as the pandemic starts to some glimmers start to show to all of us, that uncertainty continues. So thank you again, both, for taking the time today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. This was great. Be well.
Remember to join the conversation by subscribing and following Spyder Works Inc. on social media.